Hello everyone, welcome to yet another session of the daily news analysis by SRIRAM'S IAS, where we take up the important articles from the Hindu newspaper and break them down for our understanding from the UPSC examination point of view. So let's start today's discussion by taking the important articles from the newspaper. The first important article is on our screens and let's take up the discussion for the same. The article reads, Reaping the Demographic Dividend. Now, most of us would have heard this name of concept of demographic dividend, and it is a very important concept, and the article talks about the same, and we'll discuss it from the examination point of view. So this becomes important for us from a lot of perspective, such as the GS3 perspective, where we study economy, right? And then from the GS2 perspective as well, when we GS1 as well, where we study society and social aspects of the population, and GS2 as well, when we formulate policies for the same population. So therefore the usage of this concept is found across the syllabus, and that is why the topic becomes very important. So when we talk about demographic dividend, what do we mean by demographic dividend first of all? So demographic dividend means that population which is there within the age gap of 15 years to 64 years of age. So that population of a country which exists in this age bracket is known as the demographic dividend for the country, because this is the working age population as well. So this is that population which is of most productive nature for the country. So that is why it is known as demographic dividend. So why are we having this discussion? So first of all, we know that a month ago the UN World Population Prospects report was out, and it gave out certain predictions where we had covered it in our earlier sessions, and we had seen that India is going to overtake China as the most populous country in 2023 itself, right? Next year it is going to do so. But the finer aspects of understanding this report is that apart from increase in the population, there is also going to be a healthy increase for India in its demographic dividend, and this is a very positive sign for India, at least in terms of the potential that it carries. This is a fact most of us keep hearing, but the case with China is not so, because the Chinese government had employed the one child policy back in the 1990s, with which the government had compelled the residents of China to have only one child, right? So due to this one child policy, after 20 years, the country is now seeing more than, rather than population growing, it is seeing a population reduction or a population implosion. So due to that population implosion, what has happened for China is that by 2050, the report says that it will leave with only 1.3 billion people. So the population will get stagnated, of whom 500 million people will be past the age of 60. So a significant chunk of China's population will be aged population. So that would mean lessening of the demographic dividend, but that is not the case with India. With India, it would have peaked by 1.7 billion, which means 170 crore population by 2050, of whom only 330 million will be 60 years or older. So out of 1.7 billion, 330 million people are the people who will be above the age of 60. What this shows is that close to 64% of Indian population will be under the demographic dividend bracket, and this is a very positive sign for India, at least in terms of the potential that it carries for the next 20-30 years, where the country can take use of this demographic dividend of this productive population and increase its manufacturing capabilities and increase its economy and take the country forward, and even so achieve the #1 status in the world order. So this is the potential that India carries. Now the author, while discussing the potential for demographic dividend, cites certain positive signs in via some reports. Now these reports, which are prepared by premier organizations, can be of use to us to cite in the mains answers as well. So let's look at what these reports say. So the positive signs which are highlighted from certain reports. One such report is the Deloitte Insights report, which came out in 2017, which says that India's potential workforce is to rise from 885 million to 1.08 billion people over the next 2 decades from today. So this report by Deloitte, which is a premier consultancy company, has given out a prediction that the workforce in India is set to rise from today and going to the next 2 decades and remain above a billion people for half a century, betting that these new workers will be much better trained and educated. So these are the keywords, that even though the workforce is going to rise from 885 million to 1.08 billion, which means that a significant chunk of our population is going to be under the workforce. This workforce, the report is betting that they would be better trained and educated. So this needs to happen, which the report is saying that it will. The second report is by McKinsey and Company, that is India at the Turning Point, which came out in August 2020, which says that the trends such as digitization and automation, shifting supply chains, urbanization, rising incomes and demographic shifts, and greater focus on sustainability, health and safety are accelerating to create $2.5 trillion of dollars of economic value in 2030 and support 112 million jobs, or about 30% of the non-workforce in 2030. So even this report, attributing the growth of Indian economy to certain factors such as that of digitization, where the initiatives of Digital India and making services available to the people more accessible via the digital ways. So digitization has definitely happened and is set to increase with the advent of 5G now coming. Then automation of processes, shifting of supply chains. Now most of the countries are moving out from China and going on into countries such as Vietnam and South Korea. So India also needs to bank on this and increase the non-reliance of or the shifting of supply chains from China. So even India has potential in that aspect. Urbanization is happening, rising incomes and demographic shifts where people are moving into the urban sector in search of jobs, and better outcomes in sustainability where renewable energy is being focused upon more and more, and health and safety is being targeted. So based on these factors, the report says that India's workforce is set to rise and set to rise for good. Then even the Economist magazine, which is a premier magazine, in its 2022 May issue, it says that as the pandemic recedes, 4 pillars are clearly visible that will support growth in the next decade. That is the forging of a single national market in India, which is via interventions such as GST and other aspects. There has been an attempt to create a single national market. So this factor, and expansion of industry owing to the renewable energy shift, as we discussed right now, Indian government is very keen to move from or to prepare alternatives for using fossil fuels and shifting to wind power, solar power, right? Hybrid energies, that is the renewable energy sources. Then, and move in supply chains away from China, as we discussed, and continued preeminence in IT and high-tech welfare safety net for the hundreds of millions left behind by all this. So even with this, the IT sector had always been growing and is set to grow more. So based on these pillars, the Economist magazine is also saying that India has a good future when it comes to utilizing its demographic dividend and India rising to its potential. So these are some of the positive signs that the author highlights via these magazines. And then the author in the article points out as to the other positives that are there for India, whereas India is different from China. Now, when India and China started after their independence, during the 1980s, China was not much, rather we can say that nowhere in the world order it could find its place. And suddenly from 1980, it shot up and used its demographic dividend and ramped up its manufacturing. So what China did in 1980, the author points out that India is in a far better position right now as to shoot up its potential from what China did in 1980, and that is why we can do even better. And the other added advantage is that India is an open society, which again benefits the prosperity of economy in the country. So the Author points out these factors that can propel India into a positive direction, but at the same time he highlights certain negative signs as well via certain reports. Now if there were positive reports, there are certain negative reports as well. So one such report is the comparative assessment commissioned by the US Secretary of Defense. Now this is a US report, and other report is the Indian Economic Strategy to 2035 released by the Australian government. Both these reports in the gist say that India's bad infrastructure and poorly skilled workforce will impede its growth. So these are negative signs where it says that the state of infrastructure in the country is poor, and the workers who are set to rise, as the other reports are pointing out, but they are poorly skilled. That is why the intended growth that is to happen for the country will not take place. So between these positive signs and negative signs which exist, which we all know, what the author also comes to a conclusion that what is required is to invest in this demographic dividend in a very critical manner. That is, steps are required to make heavy investment in three critical areas in the Indian economy. That is the health of the population, the education of these demographic dividend population, and their skill development. These three areas are the utmost important areas that we should indulge into in a holistic manner, from the private, public as well as civil society. All three pillars need to come together and invest in these three fields. It's not just about the government. Talking about the government invests currently less than I think 2% of the GDP in health, which is very less when it comes to investing in the health of the residents of the country. So this needs to be increased, and even in education the investment in as percentage to GDP is less than 2%, which is way less for a large country such as India. So, and in terms of skill development, India is taking efforts by the skill development mission and other such initiatives that have come up to increase the skill based activities for the residents of the country. So a lot of work has started and much needs to be done. So the author also points out that heavy investments need to be made in these three critical sectors. So only when this is done, the heavy potential of the large demographic dividend that India carries could be realized. So that is the background of this particular article. It's a very critical concept, and the analysis of this concept we should be knowing. So with this, let's move on to our next article for the day. The next article now reads is Bill on Energy Conservation is introduced. Now this is an amendment bill which has been introduced to the Energy Conservation Act of 2001, which was enacted to provide for efficient use of energy and its conservation and for matter connected to those. So this bill proposes to amend this act, which was last amended in 2010. Now this, why is the need to amend the Energy Conservation Act? Now India has, in the latest 2021 climate summit which happened in Glasgow, gave out 5 pledges with respect to climate conservation and its nationally determined contributions, which means how much contributions India is going to make in lessening its carbon dioxide emissions, in steps taken to achieve carbon neutrality, in steps taken to adopt renewable energy. So currently India has a target to adopt renewable energy targets worth of 500 gigawatts, where the electricity or the energy produced by the country should, the 500 gigawatts of it should come from renewable energy sources. So these were the pledges that Indian government made in the Glasgow summit. Now in order for the domestic laws to adhere to these pledges, these amendments are being made. So with this aspect, we will take a look at what are the important provisions of this Energy Conservation Act, what does it say, and what are the key amendments that are being introduced now, which once passed in the Lok Sabha and Rajya Sabha will become an amendment act for it. So this becomes important for us from the point of view of GS2, where we study important laws, and also from GS3, where we study environment related aspects. So therefore energy conservation forms a part of the economy and environment as well. So talking about the key provisions of the Energy Conservation Act of 2001. So this act primarily talks about the norms for energy efficiency, as to what should be the steps taken by each organization and the government to adopt and to achieve energy efficiency. So the Act empowers the center to specify norms and standards of energy efficiency for appliances. So what we see as the star rating on our electrical appliances such as the refrigerators, ACs, are the norms and standards set for energy efficiency, and which appliances are doing good on it, the standards would be high for that appliance. So these standards are set by the center under the same Act, right? Industrial equipment and buildings with a connected load over 100 kilowatts or a contractual demand for more than 15 kilowatt amperes. So ranging from household appliance to big industrial appliance, the standards are set by the center with respect to energy efficiency. Then a very important body, that is Bureau of Energy Efficiency, is set up under this Act. Now this is a premier body which takes care of implementing the energy efficiency schemes and activities in the country. So the Act established the Bureau of Energy Efficiency, and the 2010 amendment extended the tenure of the Director General of the Bureau of Energy Efficiency from 3 to 5 years. This bureau can specify qualifications required for energy auditors who monitor and review the power consumption of various industries. So this is a body which takes care of a lot of activities pertaining to energy efficiency that are going on in the country. So this is an important body which was set up under the Energy Conservation Act. Then an important concept, another one, is the setting up of energy saving certificates, which would mean that those corporations or organizations which are indulging into energy efficient activities and which achieve them would be given energy saving certificates, and these certificates can be then used by them. So these would be issued by the center to those industries who consume less than their maximum allotted energy. However, this certificate can be sold to customers who consume higher than their maximum allowed energy threshold, providing for a framework of energy trading. So these certificates then come of use of trading, where that company which used less energy would get the certificate, and it can trade with the company who is using more energy in that aspect. And the Act allows the center to prohibit the manufacture, sale, purchase or import of any particular equipment unless it conforms to the specified norms issued 6 months or 1 year before. So like we saw, the standard setting for these appliances is done by the center under the Act, and the penalty for violating the standards is also there. In case of any violations under this Act, each offence shall attract a penalty of rupees 10 lakh with an additional penalty of rupees 10,000 for each day that the offence continues, and the appeal for the same can be passed by the central or state government will be heard by the appellate tribunal already established under the Electricity Act of 2003. So any grievance that any organization would have from the ruling passed by the central or state government, the company or organization or the party can appeal towards that matter as well. So this was the background with respect to the Energy Conservation Act, which is set to be amended. So now what are the key provisions which are being given or recommendations which are proposed under this Act? So the Ministry of Power, under which this Act will function, has proposed the following changes to the Act, which is first that, like we said, this is being done to align with the international commitments that have been made in the 2021 summit. So first is defining the minimum share of renewable energy to be consumed by industrial units by any establishment. So how much renewable energy should each establishment consume? That minimum share should be defined, is the first change that will come in the amendment bill. This consumption may be done directly from a renewable energy source or indirectly via the power grid. Second is incentivizing efforts to use clean energy by issuing carbon saving certificates. So apart from the energy saving certificates, carbon saving certificates would also be issued. And strengthening institutions set up originally under the Act, such as the Bureau of Energy Efficiency, which we saw is the body which would be further strengthened. Facilitating the promotion of green hydrogen as an alternative to the fossil fuels. Now the advent of green hydrogen has been a new one and is being touted as the next big thing. So this Act is incorporating the use and encouragement for the use of green hydrogen as well. Then considering additional incentives like carbon credits, which is similar to energy saving certificates and carbon saving certificates, wherein the performance that is achieved by lessening the carbon output from the establishment can be traded, and these are the carbon credits. And then including larger residential buildings under energy conservation standards to promote sustainable habitats. Now, up until now, which we were seeing that the act was setting standards for electrical appliances and industrial appliances, but now the ambit of this act or standard setting would be increased, and it would also be applied to the residential building societies, whereas a building society as a whole, the energy efficiency should be taken care of to ensure sustainable habitats. And currently only large industries and their buildings come under the ambit, like we saw. So this ambit would also be increased. So these are the changes that are going to happen in the act, which once passed will become a amendment act to this original act. So with this, let's move on to our next article for the day. The next article reads, Suresh Patel is new CVC or the Central Vigilance Commissioner, and 2 commissioners take charge. Now, this is an important article with respect to the Central Vigilance Commission, which is an important body, a statutory body which is formulated under an act of the Parliament and is a premier body which takes care of checking the corruption in the executive and in the government. So that is why CVC as a body becomes important, and for us it becomes important from the GS2 perspective, where we study the various bodies, constitutional, statutory, non-statutory. So CVC comes under that. So now talking about the Central Vigilance Commission. What do we mean by Central Vigilance Commission? Now each in executive, where all the permanent as well as temporary executives, the ministers, the bureaucrats are carrying on with their role, there are instances and chances of corruption happening. So there had to be a separate body which could check this performance and check the corruption in the system. So that body which checks this particular acts of corruption is the Central Vigilance Commission, conceived to be the apex vigilance institution free of control from any executive authority. Only when it will be free of control from the executive authority will it have enough power to check the corruption. So that is why it is free of control to monitor all vigilance activity under the central government, right? So it would monitor activities of checking corruption, maintaining transparency with respect to various activities, and it also advises various authorities in the central government organizations in planning, executing, reviewing and reforming their vigilance work. So the in-house vigilance systems that are there in the various central agencies, the Central Vigilance Commission also has the mandate to advise these institutions on various matters. So when was it instituted? The CVC was set up by the government in February 1964 on the recommendations on the Committee of Prevention of Corruption headed by the K. Santhanam. So K. Santhanam committee had recommended instituting a body which could work separately for prevention of corruption, and based on those recommendations, the CVC was set up in 1964. And then Parliament enacted the Central Vigilance Commission Act in 2003, conferring statutory status to Central Vigilance Commission. So statutory status came in, where a separate act was enacted by the Parliament in 2003. And it is an independent body, as we saw, free from executive authority and only responsible to the Parliament. So it submits its report to the President of India with respect to whatever activity it is doing, checking the corruption in the system. So then what are the functions which the Central Vigilance Commission has? So it is to exercise superintendence over the functioning of the Delhi Special Police Establishment, that is CBI, insofar as it relates to the investigation of offences, which means that under the Prevention of Corruption Act, which is the premier act dealing with offences of corruption in the country. So the body which investigates these matters is the CBI. So the Central Vigilance Commission takes use of the officers of CBI to investigate its matters. It receives complaints on corruption or misuse of office and recommends appropriate action. So this investigation is done by CBI, but the body which takes care of the handling of the cases is the CVC. And following the institutions, bodies or a person can approach a Central Vigilance Commission under the central government, Lokpal and whistleblowers. So these are the people who can approach this body. and it has no investigation wing of its own. As we saw, the investigation powers have been delegated to CBI in this matter. And talking about the composition of this, wherein this article comes in, that there are 3 dignitaries under the Central Vigilance Commission, which is a multi-member commission, of which one is the Central Vigilance Commissioner, which is being appointed by the President, and other is the 2 Vigilance Commissioners which are there as members. So total 3-member body is what constitutes the Central Vigilance Commission, of which one is the Central Vigilance Commissioner and other are the 2, one is the Chief Commissioner and the other are the Vigilance Commissioners. So total 3-member body, and they are appointed by the President on the recommendations of a committee. So the committee would formulate multiple names of these of the commissioner, and finally the President would take a call on appointing them. So this committee consists of Prime Minister, Home Minister and the leader of opposition in the Lok Sabha. If there is no leader of the opposition, then the leader of the single largest opposition party in the Lok Sabha becomes the member of this committee. So these 3 people, the Prime Minister, Home Minister and the leader of opposition in Lok Sabha, will decide on the names, and then President would be appointing. And the term for this commissioners would be 4 years or 65 years of them, whichever is earlier. Then the removal process for the Central Vigilance Commissioner is that the removal is done by the President on grounds of bankruptcy, unsound mind, infirmity of body or mind, or sentenced to imprisonment for a crime, or engages in paid employment, or has acquired financial or other interests that might affect his judgment. So these are similar grounds which are there for removal for other dignitaries as well. The additional ground which is being given, which is very specific for the Vigilance Commissioner, is that he is the authority instituted to check corruption. But if there are any charges on the person himself indulged in such kind of acts where he has acquired financial or other interests that might affect his judgment, so even that can be a ground for his removal. And he can also be removed for proven misbehavior or incapacity if the Supreme Court inquiry finds him guilty, and they can also resign by writing to the President. So they can be removed by the President on these grounds, right? So this was the background on Central Vigilance Commission and the Chief Commissioner and the 2 other commissioners that are a part of the CVC. So with this, let's move on to our next article for the day. Now the next article which features in the newspaper reads, Union Government rolls back the Data Protection Bill. Now this is a very important article from the perspective of the process of bill formation in the Parliament. Now when we study the various aspects of formation of an act, or Parliament enacting an act and that becoming a law, there is a long process of it that happens, right? So this news which has come is a stark example of the process that is followed in the Parliament. So we'll study this article from that perspective. What are the various provisions of this data protection bill, that we'll study as to what are the changes that was proposed due to which this bill is being withdrawn. So first of all, let's understand the process of this of how a bill is comes to a Parliament and becomes a law. So as we know, when the government feels that there is a need to formulate a law on any subject, so that's, in this case, is the data protection, because nowadays data is the new currency. All our transactions are generating data which is of great use for everybody, for the government to formulate its policies, for the corporation to take care of the inputs and feedback. That is why this data needs to be regulated and needs to be taken care of with respect to the residents' privacy and data safety. That is why the usage as to how this data would be used in the country by central and state government, by the various corporation, becomes of much importance to deliberate upon. And that is why the need was felt that the Data Protection Act or law on data protection should be promulgated. So in 2019, this data protection bill came in and it was instituted in the or promulgated in the Parliament. Now when a bill goes into the Parliament deliberates over that bill, and here is where on December 16th, 2021, the Joint Committee on Personal Data Protection Bill, which is a parliamentary committee. So the Parliament has several committees which deliberates upon the bill that come and check the veracity, the efficacy of the bills that come in and whether the bills are sound or not, or whether they need any changes. So this committee tabled its report in both the houses of the parliament, giving its views on various provisions, which means that it took 2 years. In 2019, this committee was instituted 11 December 2019, and it submitted its report on December 16, 2021. So this committee took 2 years to review this whole bill and submitted its report, which was headed by BJP MP P.P. Chaudhary, who also headed this joint committee on personal data protection bill, presented its final report for the upcoming bill in both houses, right? So which means that when the bill goes into the parliament, it is deliberated upon the various parliamentary committees, in this case the joint committee on the personal data protection bill that was instituted, and it submitted its report. Now when the report has been submitted, it was submitted on December 16, 2021, the government then saw the changes, and finally now it has decided that it will, after looking at the changes, which was the JCP had submitted a 542-page report with 93 recommendations and 81 amendments to the bill in December 21, and the panel, which was headed by the BJP MP, had recommended 97 corrections and improvements. So where there were so many improvements suggested and 81 amendments suggested, the government thought that it's prudent to bring out a new law itself rather than amending the old law with so many improvements. That has been the reason why the union government has withdrawn the data protection bill, and a fresh bill with the improved suggestions and recommendations now will come forward. So this gives us a snapshot as to how the process of deliberation of a bill goes on in a democracy, especially in a parliamentary form of government, where the union government, or as the case may be a state government, takes out a bill on the subject. It is deliberated by the parliament. If the parliament feels that there are changes to be made, it should be heeded by the government and proposed changes are incorporated, and then the act can be passed. So with this, let's take a look at what are the key recommendations that the committee suggested, key amendments that it suggested. So apart from the 81 amendments that were suggested, the key recommendations can be seen as in a snapshot, wherein it first was the removal of the word personal from the existing title of Personal Data Protection Bill, which was that this is intended to reflect that the bill, in order to better ensure privacy, will also be dealing with non-personal data such as personal data that has been anonymized. Now this bill, when it was taken out, which was named as the Personal Data Protection Bill, the first recommendation was that the word personal should be removed, which means that this bill segregated data into two types. One was the personal data, so that data which would have personal details, which would have the name, address of that particular individual, that would be clubbed under personal data. But that data which would not have personal details of the individual would be clubbed under non-personal data. So this classification which was done in the bill, the amendment that was suggested by this parliamentary committee is that this personal word should be removed, because the reflection should be that the data protection is happening for both personal as well as non-personal data. Second is that the section should be amended restricting the transfer of personal data outside India to say sensitive personal data shall not be shared with any foreign government or agency unless such sharing is approved by the central government. So there in the category of personal data as well, there is a special category known as sensitive personal data, which is the most sensitive part of data, which the committee has suggested that this data should not be shared outside the country with any foreign institution at all unless approved by the central government. Then the important recommendation is that the committee has recommended the formation of a data protection authority, which would take care of all the regulation, setting the standards, and this authority should be given a statutory status, right? So that has been a recommendation of the committee. Then no social media platform should be allowed to operate in India unless its parent company, which controls the technology powering its services, sets up an office in the country. So this has also been made mandatory under the recommendations of the committee, and then it proposes a separate regulatory body to set up to regulate the media. So the media sector, as we know, has come into the internet platform as well. So the committee recommends a separate regulatory body to regulate this media, and then a jail term of up to 3 years and a fine of rupees 2 lakh or both if de-identified data is re-identified by any person, which means that any violation that is happening for the crime which would be enlisted under this act, the punishments should be increased from the previous version of the bill that was promulgated. So these are the key recommendations made, and now it remains to be seen what changes are incorporated by the government and how the fresh version of the bill which would be introduced in the parliament, how it would look like. So this was a discussion on the important articles. We stop here and we'll meet again tomorrow with the important articles from tomorrow's newspaper. Thank you.